Doug Hogan and Stephen Phillips, to talk about the role of Teslin, or Teslin's recent history with community economic development. The context for this discussion is the formal Chapter 20 review of Chapter 22 of the Umbrella Final Agreement, which was concluded at the table in the late 1890, 91, and then came into force in 1993, later for some First Nations. And we're going to be talking about the impact of Chapter 22 in terms of the lives of a number of communities, but also different sectors of the economy. But we want to start the first of these series of 4 spotlights on Teslin's history of community economic development. How the community has grown, how it has changed in the years leading up to the land claims negotiations and beyond. And then we're going to get into more specific discussions about particular projects, the role of the Community Development Plan, the Community Development Corporation, the Maya Biomass Project, the role that land claims negotiations, land claims agreements have played in that process, the particular impact in the period before land claims and then in that period since. Who'd like to start? Doug, you were a big player in that?
I'm not sure I was a big player, but I was, prior to the settlement of land claims, I was in business in Teslin, and I had a small motel, restaurant, lounge, and back in those days it was tough to make a go in any of the communities, so I ended up getting into. I had a video rental, and I had vending machines, and then I got into contracting for the community, for the I guess the local improvement district at that time, snow removal and garbage haul and sewer adduction and whatnot. But unemployment was so high, it was pretty tough to make a go back then. So that was before land claims. Once land claims were settled, then all of the First Nations that settled all of a sudden had access to the capital that the Yukon as a whole was pretty cash starved back in those days. And then everybody was very tied to the rise and fall of mineral resources, and the falls were long and hard, and it affected everybody, right? So I think that the settlement of land claims and the fact that it brought in that equity was a fairly significant game changer.
Okay. Do you want to pick up on that, Brad?
Yeah, see, when did we start the reviving our economy? I would say in 2009, 2010 maybe, working on reviving our economy, and I think it finished up in 2011. But what that was is a fresh look, I guess, at the community, and just deciding, looking at what the definition of community development is, I guess, right? And the community had decided that there's 3 components to community development. One was the economic aspect, one was the social development aspect, and then the third component of community development was the environment being the natural environment, but the environment of the community dynamics, right? So, and the more development that would happen in those 3 components, then the healthier, happier a community would be. So that was and it came up with strategies in how to implement some of those strategies to realize some growth and in those 3 components. And one of the first things was decided that we needed a local community development corporation, where there's TTC did have its development corporation, its wealth generating corporation, but they needed a local not-for-profit, federally incorporated is what ended up being in the community, to assist with the community development aspect of things. And that really, to me, had assisted, that was the beginning of community development and all of the working together, I guess, the joint development of a lot of the projects in the community, and we'll probably be getting into those details a bit later, but that's maybe a jump quite ahead of what you were speaking, Doug. But
maybe we could go back a little bit and talk. You mentioned the economic community, the First Nation community development enterprise. When did it come into existence?
2013, it was federally incorporated.
Okay, but you mentioned that there was activity going on
the
before that.
for-profit.
Yeah,
The for-profit, yes.
I could probably
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
fill
Steve,
in.
go on.
I started with Teslin, well, first as a lawyer in a practice in Whitehorse. I was retained by TTC to work with Ch.22 Inc., their for-profit, so-called Economic Development Corporation. And it was already active, but so it was in the process of acquiring businesses. And it did so. It acquired a big game outfitting. It acquired a sawmill from Whitehorse. It acquired interest in RAB Energy and Yukon and took over management of those things. So it had a number of investments and involvement in the local economy. And the move also was to move some of that to Teslin. The outfit was Teslin Outfitters Limited. Yukon River Timber was relocated to Teslin in an effort to both be profitable and also develop the local economy in and around Teslin. He speaks of 1995. Doug speaks of 1995. You speak of 2013 or 2009.
Yeah.
So the gap was Ch.22 Inc. And its subsidiaries tried to do everything. It tried to build capacity, jobs, and be profitable, as well as responding to the First Nations demands at times for different services. And what you found is by 2000, 2001, it was not a success. It had lost money in the mill. Teslin Outfitters was not functioning well for local employment in the summertime, but it really wasn't very profitable. In 2001, the Yukon was basically bankrupt. We had TTC had to step in and help organize its recovery. So it was I would say that period was a real learning curve. What we did do was say, TTC decided that 10% of the compensation dollars paid over 10 years would fund TTI, fund their economic and profit business investments. So that gave capacity, and Doug was part of it. He was the president and CEO. So it gave capacity to germinate all of these efforts. But what we found, to fast forward, was when you mix capacity building, economic development, service for the First Nation owner, and profits, and in a locally politically charged, huge expectations around the claim, around the self-government, is your profits always lost. So the focus then, 2001, 2002, was no, we have to make money in order to survive long term. So Ch.22 then turned its attention to being profitable, and it started on a road of acquiring cash-rich, profitable companies and building a whole enterprise that extends all across Western Canada now. But it left community economic development and capacity building in the traditional territory unfulfilled.
Okay.
Fast forward, 2009, et cetera, and I was part of that group. Say, well, okay, how do we address that side of it?
Okay. Yeah. Can I go back, Steve, a little bit and ask you to fill in, all of you, as you will, the blanks on what happened on the enterprises that were not successful and why they might not have been successful, You mentioned the mill, you mentioned
Big game outfitting.
big game outfitting, you mentioned Whiter's Inn.
Yeah.
Could you, maybe the three of you, any one of them, unpack each one of those a little bit? Because as you said, they were a learning experience, but it'd be interesting to know what you learned from those experiences.
You were there, front and center, Doug. You,
I'll let Stephen jump in, but just one comment I would make is that it was interesting that prior to us getting involved in a number of these enterprises, a big group of Yukon First Nation economic development type of people went on a fact-finding tour over to Alaska. And we went through...
Which had a land claim in 1971, which some young people might not know about.
Yeah, but you know, this was after the settlement of the self-government agreements, and so you know, I can't remember, but there was a big group of us who went over, and we toured you know, the Sea Alaska and Gold Belt and Huna Totem and you know, a number of them, and you know, pretty consistently, you know, we met and they shared everything with us, you know, their growing pains. They all went broke, you know, early on in their endeavors, and you know, one of the things they told us was, don't invest in your own community for the sake of investing in your own community. You know, don't invest for the sake of creating jobs and capacity building because of the politics and the economics. And you know, so they advised us as a group not to do that, and we ended up, because of political pressures or whatever, doing exactly that, right? So you know,
Let's pause there for a second, because the experience across Canada, and not just in Alaska, has been, for successful development corporations, has been to have a firewall between the political arm and the economic development arm. The tendency to think if you're making political decisions in the economic arena, they're often not good ones. But the other thing about Alaska, I remember, you mentioned Sea Alaska. I remember, that's because I'm old enough to, when the criticism Sea Alaska first established was that all their employees were non-Tlingit. And it took quite a few years till everybody from the president down to the janitor was actually Tlingit. I mean, that was also a kind of transition that I suspect was painful and initially not profitable. Do you want to talk about that a bit, Doug?
well, you know, I think that's essentially what Stephen was referring
Yeah.
to when they, you know, they refocused and started focusing on, you know, being profitable, profit driven. And you know, that mandate was made very clear by the General Council, that they wanted to be profit driven, right? They wanted to build some wealth for the First Nation, and you know, part of the discussions at the time was putting, you know, a very, you know, clear line between the politics and the business arm. And Stephen was involved with, you know, helping design all of that back in the day. But you know, I think that was one of the lessons learned early on, was that needed to happen, and it was successful for us, you know. And it was interesting that, you know, we had a period of number of years, almost 10, that you know, the for-profit corporation did really well, and you know, we would report on all these, you know, very good returns on investment, and you know, the profitability. And you know, it seemed that the more profitable and the more we grew our wealth, the more criticism we got about, you know, what are you doing for us in the community, right?
Well, I can imagine, maybe I can ask you to answer this, Steve, that when you start investing outside of the community, you talked about in Western Canada, there are going to be people probably who criticize, why aren't you investing here, and why are you taking the money out of the territory? That doesn't create any jobs in the community, et cetera, et cetera. Did you get some of that, or you remember some of that?
oh, well, yeah, it's persistent all the time. It's at every general council meeting, and I don't. TTC has a somewhat unique, in the territory at least, governance structure, because it's clan-based, and there is a 25-member equivalent to a legislative assembly type approach. They call it general council, but it's the ultimate governing body within TTC's structure and constitution. And it's got 5 reps from each of the clans. So, every year there is an annual reporting to General Council by the business arm, by the investment and business arm. And it is always a theme. What's your data? How many clinkets? Where? And what's your training programs? And et cetera. And the answers are usually, not very positive. We've tried, et cetera. A lot of the jobs are not in the Yukon territory, but there's an ongoing effort, but it's not the priority and therefore not seen as successful and not the focus. Now, that will change, I think, as there is more profitability, then there is more room to spend monies in those areas without really affecting the overall profitability.
Do you remember some of those discussions, Brad?
Not these ones. No, I came in probably 2008 on with the local community development. Although the discussion that is familiar is the non-government asset. This whole discussion is going through a strategic planning process currently, and some of that discussion is still happening. Yeah.
What do you remember though about the second entity you talked about, which was community development? What do you know, or what do you remember about the debate about that, as opposed to the for-profit corporation?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We actually looked during the process of establishing the local not-for-profit corporation. We looked at five different models, and that was chosen by the people, the leadership, to be the model to go with. But people understood, I think, that local development corporation, working, as I had mentioned, in all 3 of those components for the development of the whole community, for economic, the social development, and the environment was, it was the way to go, and rightfully so, and it was involved. I know we're not talking yet about the 10-year community development plan, but that 10-year community development plan, that was initially led by that development corporation, and the development corporation, I view it as the entity to implement all of these projects from the 10-year community development plan.
So what is the relationship between the 2 entities now?
I don't know.
Well, there isn't one. The connection is TTC, the First Nation itself, because it's the sole member of the Community Economic Development Corporation, and in the end, it's the beneficiary. The TTC is 100% beneficiary of the profit side and investment side. So the connection is TTC. Because there wasn't, an actual active office and staff of the profits arm in Teslin itself. So when the nonprofit enterprise, DDC, let's call it, Teslin Development Corp, right? It set up shop. There wasn't any staff relations, if you will, nor were the boards talking to one another. So. And it became obvious that was a disconnect that wasn't being solved at the political level. So they're now part of the overall, what we call the non-governmental asset network structure. So they are now part of the top part of that, and likely now that'll promote more meetings of the boards. But they're now part of the ongoing reporting, internal reporting to General Council, etc. But that is I think it was a weakness for the last 10 years. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to the 10-year plan in a minute, but when I maybe ask Doug to reflect on, there was mention of the mill and the biomass and others. Could you talk about some of the projects or some of the investments, and talk a little bit about the history of the ones that were evident in the community that everybody could see and watch what was happening?
Yeah, for sure. You know, the two businesses that we kind of leaned towards were the businesses that, you know, the community felt that they had, you know, a strong skill set for, you know, and this was the hunting guiding, and you know, back in the day, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, a lot of the men and women in the community went out to different hunting outfits, not just the ones that were owned locally. You know, there was at one point there was two of the Tlingit business people that owned their own hunting outfits, and of course they hired, you know, pretty exclusively from the community. But you know, a lot of the other outfitters also, you know, competed for the guys in the community. I think as they did probably in lots of the communities, but you know, there was a real affinity for that type of investment. But you know, when we come in with a corporate ownership structure, you know, it was a completely different way of running these businesses, which, you know, were family-run businesses, right? And you know, a lot of hard work. You know, one of the businesses that we bought was off of one of the clan leaders and you know, business members of the community. We bought a hunting outfit off of him, but you know, he was when he was running the business, you know, he would be out there at 40 below in the wintertime delivering feed to his horses on Skidoo and whatnot, and you know, trying to hire that same kind of commitment was difficult. So you know, that was a struggle for us with the sawmill and with the hunting outfit.
Let me move on to the sawmill for a second, because there's been lots of downstream comment from that one. But on the outfitting business, I assume then that the conclusion was that a sole proprietorship was the better model for actually running such an enterprise?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
So talk about the mill a little bit, because I've heard comments about now Tesla's in the position of having to, at great expense, buy milled products from Whitehorse rather than having a local business do the same thing.
Well, we got into that business for the same reason, but you know, and you know, we bought an existing business that was located in Whitehorse, and you know, to our credit, we did go on a fact-finding tour. We went to Finland with the gentleman that we had bought the business from, who was Finnish, and we did a tour of a number of the sawmills around Finland, and you know, and we seen the successes that they had there, but you know, it was interesting to note that you know, there the government was the one that took all of their product that they produced and sold it, you know, as a collective. The government there was you know, very supportive of the industry. You know, everywhere you went in you know, where there was any kind of government infrastructure, including the airports, everything, you know, wooden walkways, wooden benches, everything was wood. There was no, you know, cement or ceramic tile or anything like that. And a lot of the sawmills in that were located right in the center of communities, or the communities had built up around the sawmills. You know, all of the forest was farmed basically. It was thinned and you know, was privately owned. So there was you know, a lot of things that we seen that, you know, we probably would never be able to replicate. But the most interesting thing that we seen when we were there was that they took their byproduct, which is, you know, they have the same type of fiber that we have here, and 60% of it is waste, or as they call it, byproduct, and they use their byproduct to fund their operations. But they had pulp mills. They had, you know, they would have heating. You know, they'd use it for heating of for community central heating systems and that type of thing. Where in the Yukon it was waste. You know, you get a few slabs out of it and maybe sell them for, you know, $20 a bundle or something. But there was, you know, that was the issue, and there's nothing close enough that we could sell that byproduct, you know, to a pulp mill or to whoever.
Well, I mean, I've been in the northern parts of the Nordic countries and seen the way in which somebody would phone a farmer and say, I need a certain amount of pine and spruce, and cut them, leave them out by the front of your property, and we'll come along and pick them up, which is a very different model than the PC style clear cutting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's obviously leads to a question about biomasses. You got into that business, and could you talk, any of you talk about that one?
I'll jump in and just talk about it briefly, and then somebody else can talk about it. But you know, at the time of when we were struggling to be successful with our sawmill, which we called Yukon River Timber, you know, we had designed it to be very versatile. You know, we could change the product that we were manufacturing kind of mid-shift, and we were, you know, we had product that was pretty profitable. But we were also told that it would take 3 years of consistent marketing into, you know, these trade shows and whatnot, wherever you were going, in order to establish some level of credibility, because of, you know, the many sawmills over time that had gone, you know, had started and then disappeared, right? So you know, it was a big hurdle to get that confidence in the marketplace. And so, you know, I think we had designed as best we could to be, you know, to be profitable, and, you know, we were probably, you know, close to being there. I think the year we were shut down, we had marketed into Alaska, you know, pretty extensively for 3 years, and we had a number of orders in that. But by then, you know, the First Nation had lost confidence in the business, and so, you know, that was a bit detrimental for us. But I was actually running it then, and you know, I could see, you know, the way that we had gone into it, and the potential was there. You know, if we found, you know, if we found a solution to the byproduct, the 60%, you know, that business would be very profitable, and it's a really good fit with the skill set in the community, and I think it still is. You know, people really enjoyed working at the sawmill. They could, you know, they could see what they had done at the end of the day, right? And you know, and they could see that product going into the houses and the infrastructure that the First Nation was putting in.
Steve, you've been around for a while. You remember I had a bit of a problem with the sawmill in Watson Lake, which we got into for all the good reasons, and then found you might be able to cut the wood, but you couldn't always sell it. You know, all the kind of. Could you reflect a little bit on?
Well, I actually come from the East Coast, come from a family that we owned and harvested pulpwood for a pulp mill. And so there was no such thing as a byproduct. It all went, well, the limbs were the byproduct, but they would take everything. So it was an interesting, and I was involved with the Watson Lake as well. But we had, in the Yukon, what I saw was that it was the lack of infrastructure. You know, there was a lack of really good public policy on the idea of going into a 20-acre parcel and only cutting the big trees was considered offensive. Really was by environmentalists. They say, what? This, you know, you're high grading. And then you turn around and ship them to Japan or the Asian market where you got the maximum dollar for this beautiful log. That was considered no value added concept. So there was a lot of public policy problems that YRT was up against, and it was trying to develop a product to sell into Alaska, and then we did get hit with the softwood lumber tariff, and it did impact, and that was sort of the last nail. But what I saw from the attempts with YRT and the Watson Lake is that there was missing sort of access to assured harvesting rights. You didn't. There was no timber harvesting agreement available. You were relying on annual allowable cuts. You couldn't. You weren't sure. And then if you had to replant them, like there were no greenhouses doing it up here. Everything, like we didn't have that. And then parts would break, and you had no other sawmills. So there was no boneyard of machinery, no local supply, and then you didn't even have the skills for that high level stuff. So, and it still doesn't exist today, from what I can see in the Yukon.
What about the potential going forward of biomass? You had some experience with that. What does that have a future?
I think it does, actually. Well, I mean, it does because, I mean, I haven't been directly involved in, well, I have actually, yeah. But it takes care of that byproduct. And it does so in a volume sense. Instead of hiring a fellow bunches, to cut 6,000 cubic meters in 2-3 months, you can now harvest, you could even do it with skidoos and chainsaws. You can harvest at a level that lets the community grow with it. And you don't have to, and it's if you think about it, the volume that you need is much, much smaller than trying to turn, 20,000 cubic meters into boards to sell to Kilridge. So I think, and I haven't been involved in the direct planning, but I could see that in the community, say, okay, well, we have the skill set to bring that along. So Doug, you should jump in there. Am I way off base?
No, you're right on, and that's, that's one of the things where, we seen that that biomass was a possible solution, so we started talking about it and we put it into our planning, and brings us around to our 10-year community development plan, because we bought into the biomass vision early on. We got government to buy in as well, and so we weaved it into all of our planning and all of our future planning, and which we can continue to do. So we got significant support from governments, and so that's what we've done. And Brad could probably jump in here, but this is been really key for us. Was getting the buy-in from the community, and initially it was tough, right? Because they envisioned huge clear cuts, right? And so when we started talking about everything being designed around biomass and putting it into your mechanical systems and all of our projects going forward, and creating this local economy, offsetting at the time I think it was 80,000 liters of heating fuel a year coming in. There was a lot of resistance, but I think because of the planning and the community consultation and our 10-year community plan, I think that's where was kind of the rationale, and it was where the success started to generate some legs, was that 10-year community development plan.
So
and that was Brad's.
Yeah. So Brad, you got lots of cues here. Maybe you could talk about biomass and as a segue into the 10-year community plan. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yep. So originally there were the 10 main government buildings with the biomass, and there were the 3 energy centers where the biomass units were housed, and then the heat piped into these 10 buildings. But there's additional, I think 4 additional duplexes, rentals, and then the school as well, which is under a heat agreement with YG, as will for the rentals. But as Doug said, it's all within the planning. So the new community services building, for example, also has the biomass facility planned for that infrastructure. But it just goes, like with the 10-year community development plan, every project that's happening within Teslin, be it the Village of Teslin, be it Teslin Cligget Council, be it the DDC, and even YG, any project that's happening within TTC's traditional territory are on 3 charts. And these 3 charts, there's a TTC chart, a VOT chart, and a joint chart. So in the joint chart, for example, YG has their 5-year capital plan. So we take out from their plan every project over the next 5 years that's happening within TTC's traditional territory, and we put that into our 10-year community development plan. And we do that with all the joint charts, the joint projects and initiatives, regardless if it's TTC or VOT lead. That's where they are. For example, one right now is the flood mitigation. It impacts both the shorelines of Crown land, VOT land, and TTC, so it's in the joint chart. But we'll talk about community local project management after, but and then you have all of the TTC-led charts in their projects in their charts. And over the years, and we track it. We started building it in 2013, finished it in 2015, and we had 3 people from the village of Teslin, 3 people from TTC, and 3 people from the community at large over about 18 months to come up and have the first draft of the.
So let me make it, it was 18 months to develop the first draft of the 10-year plan.
In 2015 is when we finished.
Yeah.
And we are now, this year, fiscal year, we're in the 8th year. So we have 7 completed years of the original 10-year. But every year that drops off, we add one, so it continually
Okay.
is a living 10-year document. And at the end of each year, we meet with the community and we show the community the this is what we said we were going to do, this is what we did, or this is what we didn't do, and this is what we have planned for next year. And we engage them with some priority exercises to better understand their thoughts on what they would like to see for projects for next year or the next 10 years. And then we just strategize and get the teams from both the Village of Teslin and TTC together to start implementing some of these projects. So that in itself is a story. But I just wanted to go back to some of the like in the last 7 years, there's been $75 million worth of projects that has happened in Teslin. 6.6 for just for last year it was 6.2 for Teslin, 4.4 for 6.2 for TTC, 4.4 for VOT, and for the joint it was like 5.7 million. So just last year alone was 16.5, 75 in the last 7 years. But for the next 10 years, it's like $448 million worth of projects. Just this year alone is 34 million that's in the books. But not all those projects necessarily happen. So they're, some of them are bumped out a year. And it all depends on tracking the funds. But why it's so high in the next couple of years is the bridge project.
Which we'll come back to.
Yeah, because we track their projects as well. And the reason we track it, just so we don't have any highs and lows in terms of employment or the reviving our economy document that we had done in 2011 was, looking for those types of strategies to keep it, all these projects planned appropriately. And labor, employment, for example, which is the other thing that we track here. In terms of these charts, we have the person years employment that these create.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Go ahead.
One of the things that, you mentioned the 18 months, to get through to the 10-year community development plan. I think Brad mentioned reviving our economy, but we had done a lot of other planning over a period of time. And a lot of that other planning work that we had done was basically all kind of rolled into the 10-year community development plan.
Yeah.
Because we had done, tourism strategic planning,
Well, for the joint planning, like the community has the joint recreation plan, joint emergency measures plan, joint development of VOT's official community plan, joint development of this 10-year community development plan, but we also have the joint development of the community energy plan.
Yeah.
I mean, it just these synergies and working together of municipality and your First Nation only makes sense.
So let me ask you this, because I'm curious, do you in that sense the cooperation that's going on, is it largely at the leadership level, or is there deep involvement by ordinary citizens in these processes, or have they been?
It's leadership, but it's yeah. I mean it's been good all around, really.
Yeah.
Everybody's been buying in. I mean it demonstrates by working together of the employment and training and mentoring opportunities, the local contracting opportunities for local contractors comes as a result of working together, right?
So let me ask you about the labor market training. To what extent have you been, as a community, been able to do things like saying, we really do need to get some electricians or plumbers or carpenters, and who do we talk to about getting apprenticeships for them, and do you, for example, use the Chapter 22 provisions, which says flexible apprenticeships for Indigenous people, which other people have complained isn't happening?
Right. Yeah. In terms of the 10-year community development plan, there's 3 things that we're working on, and that education and training component is one of them. But there's 3 things that we still need to do for our 10-year community development plan. One is a skills analysis or a skills inventory, and having a look at the skill sets that we need to be able to implement our 10-year plan. So realizing what we have in terms of skill sets in our community, understanding what we need, and then filling in that gap, right? So right now, we just tapped into some dollars, not entirely related to the bridge, but also related to the training for these, to fill in that gap for the whole community development plan. So that's one thing. A replacement reserve chart is also what we need for these projects, and then an O&M chart. It's one thing to find the money to build the infrastructure in the first place, but we also have to keep in mind about the O&M well into the future, right, as well as the replacement reserve. So we're still involved in those things. The whole training and employment strategy still needs some attention, but we are just tapped into some money lately to be able to assist in doing that.
Well, as you know, across Canada, there's been lots of complaints in the last few years about water quality and water systems in First Nation communities. And the government has acted with capital, but there's sometimes been complaints that they overbuild, and there's no one in the community with the skills, capacity to maintain those systems. And do you get into issues like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was one of the reasons why we started managing these projects locally, was exactly for that. The water treatment center, or the water treatment plant, was a good project, but there were the roads where the design that was so before we started project managing, all of these projects were managed by YG. And they would put it out, and they would hire a contractor. They would come into the community and do the project, and the community would realize little provision of services, you know, like with heavy equipment or labor or any type of work. So things needed to change, really, and also the design didn't seem to fit when they brought it and started to implement the projects. It just didn't fit. So we started implementing, I think, in year 1 of our plan, and implementing these projects, like locally managing these projects. And we would do everything from the beginning in terms of doing the design, and just hiring that expertise and getting it done based on local input. And then we would manage the projects. We would unbundle a lot of the larger contracts, that if it was YG implementing this project, you know, there would be just one tender that they would put out. On a project where there was one tender the year before that YG put out, we did the other half of that project locally, and we had 61, I believe it was, 61 local contracts put out in the community, still conforming to the territorial and federal procurement regulations. But we unbundled it, and there were 61 local contracts, and there was local employment and training, compared to the year before when there was just the one one contract that was put out for a large contractor from outside of the community coming in with all their equipment and personnel, right?
Yeah. I might want to get Steve and Doug into this conversation, but let me ask you one question. It sounds like you've got remarkable high degree of cooperation between the community and the territory and other governments on these things. Chapter 22 talks about joint capital planning, but most communities are complaining that that's not happening. You sound like you're the exception.
Yeah, but even at that, we're not participating in the development of their 5-year capital plan. We've asked them, we're reported to, and then we take it out and put it into our 10-year community development plan. But at the last meeting, and it was just a couple of months ago, they had committed to involving us in the planning for next year for their 5-year community, 5-year capital plan. We'll see if that happens.
And they is YG,
Correct.
Yeah, yes.
Correct.
and not Canada.
No.
But that was a struggle though to get primarily, I guess, Highway and Transportation Services to start to share that. I pushed them hard for a lot of years, and they actually came to us, I can't remember how many years ago it was, 5 or 6 years ago, and they said, well, we have no capital projects planned in the community over the next 5 years. And I said, well, I know that you're planning a new highway shop, and what about the bridge? They said, oh, well, that doesn't count, it's too big a project. That was their rationale, right? It's been a struggle, but they slowly but surely, we've got them there, and they're now reporting to all of the First Nations. They go around, do a community tour, and they share their 5-year capital plan as it pertains to each traditional territory. And they were somewhat reluctant to share the numbers, and they would have like $1 million plus.
Yeah, it'd be a range.
Yeah, the bridge was $1 million plus. It's a $160 million project, but in their budget, their budget projections, it was just $1 million plus, which is, so unrealistic that is, of no value, right? I mean, we pushed them on that, but they are coming around. We do a lot of joint planning, and they're often kind of the last ones we got to drag into it. We did a pilot project with them recently, and that both of these guys were involved with around asset management planning, which hadn't been done, but I think we did a joint project with YG and the municipality. But again, we had to kind of drag them to the table.
I want to come back later to the Chapter 22 employment commitments and contracting for procurement commitments. But since you raised the question of numbers on the bridge, let's get into the bridge and talk about the numbers. You talked about a $160 million project. What is Teslin's share of that pie?
That remains to be seen, I would think. I haven't been involved in the recent discussion, so maybe one of these guys could speak to that. But, it was designed to be, pretty inclusive. But again, we had to push YG hard. They originally came into the community with a tender that they had posted, and was the first we heard of the project as they tendered about 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
So there was no consultation prior?
They posted a repair to the bridge, and it was going to be in the $13 to $15 million range, and they had not discussed it with the First Nation, the municipality, or the community. And the first we seen it was posted in the YG, tendering. I think we seen it in the paper.
That was
in the newspaper. And so, that was a bit of a struggle. They said they didn't have to go through YESA because it was a repair. And we ended up in a bit of a debate with them, and they pulled out of that process, and we went back and started from square one, and we got involved with the project, and it took a lot of time get them to where we're at now. But you know, we were involved with the design of or the structure of the design, the call for design, and we sat in all that, all those, that contracting process. We sat in on the scoring and the award, you know, so early on we're involved with the project at a very high level.
Stephen, have your skill set been brought to bear on this?
Oh, yeah. Especially with Doug's, you know, he hasn't been directly involved for 8 months, and Brad as well. But, you know, this is on the bridge project, right? So the first thing was the socioeconomic environmental concerns. So first time around when YG tendered it, TTC threatened to go to court. We had the writ ready to go because they refused to have it screened through YESA because they said it's only, we don't screen bridge repairs, they said. It's a matter of policy. We don't care what the environmental impact is, we just don't do it. Too expensive. And they had an excuse saying, well, it's not a replacement, it's not a new build, and it's within the highway right of way, et cetera. So we said, okay, well, that's your position, then we're going to stop the project. So they pulled the tender, stopped the project, and then they engaged more fulsomely with TTC. And as Doug said, the intent was that the project be co-designed, that they would come at this with a lot more involvement from both the Village of Teslin and TTC's perspective. We did end up in that process signing a charter agreement with YG, between TTC and YG. It is, and it refers to Chapter 22 at length and the impacts on rights and treaty rights, et cetera. But it's essentially a process document, and that moved to an implementation plan that set out a whole range, multi-million dollars of potential benefits flowing to TTC citizens and businesses mainly, and even local businesses.
What's the order of magnitude of those local benefits in that discussion?
Well, and we were what, $15, $20 million?
Yeah.
In that range? On a project that we figured was 85, 90 million.
Yeah, at one time 40. Right.
I would say, and guys jump in here, but I think what happened was that we were unsuccessful in unbundling this project. So we tried to, it was just too big, and they wanted, the YG, it was too big of a project for them to try and manage it in an unbundled sense. They wanted one company on the hook for the whole project. So that presented huge challenges to getting at the subcontracting and employment opportunities, because then it became a stipulated price, one company project. So we tried to, you know, develop an implementation plan and have the bidders tie it to a participation plan so that they provided in their bids for how they would fulfill the First Nation participation plan and implementation plan, and score them in terms of a point system on how well they did that. We're the project just not quite been signed off, but has been awarded. We're not sure that was a successful way to do it at all, from my perspective. Yeah.
Let me go to Brad on this, but then I want to come back to you, if I could, Stephen, on lessons learned from this experience, if I can. I mean, it may be too soon because you don't know the final outcome, but if I could come back to that, Brad?
What was the question, sorry?
No, I was going to come, that's a question I'm going for Steve, but your perspective on the whole bridge project process and planning questions.
It was time consuming from the TTC perspective, right? And it was at TTC's coin to participate in that lengthy process, and continues to be. I mean, there was some contribution agreements that allow, or that provided some funds to TTC, but you know, difficult to cover all the costs, because you needed pretty much all of, well, the majority of TTC government departments at the table, because you wanted to lessen the social impact, but you also wanted the economic impacts for employment, training, contracting opportunities. You had the environment in there, like departments, so lands and resources. So I mean, it was a lengthy process, a costly process. There were 12 versions of the implementation plan, and you know, it was the discussions were good and detailed. I don't know if the community was kept up to kept informed as much as could have been, but yeah, we were hoping that we could do a lot more, really, in terms of more local benefits than it turned out.
Stephen, can I come back to the question of lessons learned? I invite all of you into that, but if you had to start that process on the bridge, because it's a very big project, and big projects don't come that often to small communities, and so there's not a once in a lifetime, but a sort of occasional opportunity, if I can put it that way. And you obviously want to maximize the benefits for not only in terms of employment, but also training for small business people, a whole range of things, while mitigating the things you talked about, social impacts and environmental damage.
See, in the end, we last fall and up through to Christmas time, while the tender was actually out there, the request for proposals was out there, 2 companies bidding. We pulled together a TTC community perspective. We call it a cooperation agreement framework. And we pulled together what was the community perspective on needs and expectations and concerns. And on reflection, we needed that 2-3 years before the December date. And the other thing that's one theme, one aspect, one criteria we haven't talked about is the need for management. Everywhere, nothing happens. We have lots of planning, et cetera, but we need management. And I think what happened where we sit today is got a plan, we had opportunities, we have government-to-government agreements, but we didn't end up with a project with enough Tlingit management in place to, on the ground, materialize on the opportunities. There's going to be some. It's hard to put an actual number on it, but there's various pieces all over the place. But in order to hold the winning contractor true to their participation plan, what they've undertaken in their bid, we need management on the ground in Teslin, and we need access to more capacity in that area.
So let me, before I go to you, Doug, I want to zero in on that question a little bit, because time and time again in these interviews about Chapter 22, we've run into the concern expressed by First Nation people that the people managing major projects in YG or the federal government have never read the UFA, don't know what's in Chapter 22, and they don't feel they have any sense of obligation about complying with the requirements.
I think that TDC did negotiate a government-to-government agreement. It wasn't an MOU, it wasn't an empty promise. And Doug was central to that, 2014, I think, Doug, or 2015. And that has been, we've got a tool, you see, and it holds at the director ADM level. Yeah. You must come to a meeting. And so that has opened the door, but until that happened, there was no sense of obligation, certainly within the federal or the territorial bureaucracy. This has been a consistent theme from when I started with Tesla in 1998 and implementing the agreements. YG said, what? We don't owe anyone anything. We have no role. The most we're going to do is share some crown royalties, maybe. And that's now today, you won't hear that anymore. You hear, oh, we have an agreement, we have a government-to-government relationship, and it's achieved all of these goals and objectives.
Okay. Can I come back to you, Doug, and the question about lessons learned from this experience, the bridge experience?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons, and I think it is a bit early to kind of quantify, come and talk to me 3 years from now or 4 years from now. But, I think that, we set enough structure in place that we're going to be, somewhat successful. But, one of the things that Brad had pointed out to us, early on, was that we needed to push them hard for an implementation manager position, and we wanted them to fund it. Because of the size and scope of the project, and all First Nations, I think, consistently, have capacity issues, right? Everybody is overwhelmed, and I think that we were doing really well positioning ourselves around this project. But, if you lose focus for a second, they kind of revert to, the well-beaten path of least resistance, right? And I think they did that somewhat in this project, but, and it was just because of us not being focused necessarily in all the areas we could and should have been. And I think that, Brad had suggested, 2 years ago or something, that we needed an implementation manager specifically for this project, but for a number of the projects within our 10-year community development plan, so that we had that focus, right? And we didn't have that, and I think that cost us in the end.
Yeah, it absolutely did. Yeah, and that's continued, it's a continued need.
What you mean is there were opportunities that might have been realized that you can't realize because of the timeframes involved?
And the time frame, but the timeline, but the time, it's just time consuming as a government, and everybody that was involved was dealing with it off the side of their desk, right? There was nobody focused necessarily on the bridge project or any of these large projects. And if we had that, it would be a definite focus, and I think the result would have been different, for sure.
Yeah, and I can give you an example. Again, camp services. We knew that there had to be a camp service provider, and had TTC started with looking at that sector, looking at that type of business, 2-3 years, perhaps bid on or formed a company or got involved with a partner that does that. Well, you would have been positioned not just to be a bidder or into the process, but you would have had to, you would know how to put together that business opportunity and to materialize it. As it was, we had, basically a number of camp providers approaching TTC, but we didn't have anybody that they really could talk to or negotiate a deal with.
I mean, times have changed. I remember as a young person, winter of 69, 70, when there was a bridge needed on the Dempster Highway. Steel, serious bridge. And it was the Canadian Corps of Army Engineers came in and built it over one winter. Came and went. Hardly anybody in the community was involved. These are different times. Let me draw the camera back a little bit, though, to this two general questions about Chapter 22, which overall promises First Nations a bigger share, there's numbers like 25% and so forth, of bigger slice of the pie, a bigger chance in the economy. Two things, first in employment and two in contracting. Now, for a long time, employment opportunities were somewhat limited because of the lack of training that you talked about, Brad, or education levels, experience levels, and so forth. And we talked about, there was a commitment in Chapter 22 about flexible apprenticeships designed for Indigenous people, but everywhere in Canada know that often experiential learners rather than former book learners, so young people could watch someone taking an engine apart and then put it back together again, but they might not be able to pass a math test or whatever. So that challenge in employment, you've just mentioned one about the time frames and the project management, the local project management that you need to achieve potentials here. But let me draw it back a little bit to a general question about whether those Chapter 22 commitments have been met from the point of view of leadership in TTC or the Teslin community.
Can I jump in first
Yeah,
there, Brad?
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed from our perspective is that early on, with our 10-year community development plan and all of the joint planning that we have done, and pulling YG in, somewhat reluctantly at times, but getting the municipality fully on board and getting the community on board. We've consulted with the community and we continue to consult with the community. So you had a lot of consultation, but a lot of support, and so early on we met with a lot of success, and by taking on the projects and kind of unbundling them because we were taking on project management of them and whatnot. But over that period of time where we've been successful, every year it's the Yukon government and the federal government have made their procurement or their sole sourcing guidelines even harder to work with, and that's caused us a lot of issues for the success of this. They like to stand up and brag about this successful relationship and the model that we're using, but at the same time they continue to make it harder and harder to the point now where it's been almost impossible to keep the model that we've been using, to keep using it successfully. And then and by us doing it the way we were doing, we were taking on the unbundling, right? So so because they could have easily unbundled a number of components of the bridge project, in my opinion. They could have easily done it, and where there was a high level of a high skill set in the community. We're not bridge builders, nor did we want to take on the liability of a $160 million project. But there was there's probably $15-16 million or more of gravel work, for instance. We have a lot of capacity in the community. We could have dealt with all of that, and but they found it easier just to bulk it up and then put it out to invitational bids, right? To the general contractor found it easier, and the government just allowed it to go ahead. So that was an issue for us, and at the same time they're reducing the levels that they're allowed to sole source, which then limited our ability to hire project managers and unbundle.
So what is the time period for the construction of the bridge project?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, they don't want to go into the fifth, they're saying. They won't be able to get into the water this year until August, until the DFO permitting comes in. So, but there's all the development work that they're doing now, like the gravel pit development and probably camp set up, batch plant set up, that type of stuff.
See, I remember, for example, this is just one example of major capital projects, northern Manitoba doing the limestone project. They knew it was a 10-year project. So they said from the beginning, we're going to leave behind at the end of this project Cree, Dene, Métis, mechanics, electricians, plumbers, carpenters in the communities at the end of this project. And we're going to do that by designing training programs that will actually get people so they can actually be employed throughout this 10-year period, but also so that the skills will remain in the community. Now, there's a bit of a stranded asset problem with that theory, but that takes at the center, not in your community level, at the center, the people who are doing capital projects, enough foresight that they can actually engage the communities and involve them in those discussions. And it seems to me that foresight is implied in the joint capital planning of Chapter 22. Maybe it is only just beginning to happening. Is that a fair comment?
Well, I screaming and we forced them to a government-to-government discussion, they being YG again, over the period January, February, on the bridge deal, but only almost embarrassing them to the table. So I wouldn't call it, has it changed? I sense it is some. But what I saw was still very, very, in other words, the instructions they have was, certainly from a highways perspective in YG, is build a bridge. And they kept saying that. Well, we're just here to build a bridge. We kept saying, no, you're not just here to build a bridge. You have a legacy of 2 bridges, and let's look at the legacy in Teslin. And we went into some detail. I said, so there is a greater responsibility, and it flows out of Chapter 22. It flows out of the government-to-government agreement. It flows out of you being a treaty partner and part of the self-government agreement. So you have to think of it that way. And we ended up with a government-to-government agreement. We had to go to the top. The Premier had to get involved. We had to get Aboriginal relations, and it was very difficult. And if we hadn't had the binding government-to-government agreements legally and the charter agreement, I don't think we would have gotten anywhere.
Okay. So on these kind of issues, what's the relationship like with the federal government?
There isn't one.
Yeah.
Okay. Brad, you?
No, I'm just.
But there's a reason for that. Is it okay for me to? Okay. The relationship that TTC has is the financial relationship with the federal government under the self-government agreement. It's called the Financial Transfer Agreement, right? That pays TTC an annual unconditional grant, all right? YG is not involved in that. The original designers of the final agreements, the Yukon precedent, combined with the devolution from Canada to Yukon in 2004, which was post TTC's 1995 agreement, the first 4, left, I would say, a fundamental confederation problem in the Yukon. There's a gap, and it leaves the First Nations floundering in the gap of the constitutional arrangements we have today. Because YG, when they became part of the land claims agreements and settlements, they had to find a role, and I wasn't involved in those. So, but the role was not very well defined, and some people say by design, but that persists today. And then Canada said to YG, well, here's the rest of our responsibilities except for national defense and, and clearly national things. So YG, 2004, devolution, it's all yours. Oh, but what about the relationship with the First Nations? Well, we spent 10 years litigating and, under subsequent government saying, who is in charge of governing in the Yukon? A quote from a premier saying, we're going to go to the Supreme Court of Canada and we're going to figure that out. Supreme Court of Canada said, you're in this together. It's one canoe. So you better start getting it together. Canada has, in my view, has just stood back and said, you guys figure it out.
Well, let me put to you, Steve, this question, because there was a certain former lawyer, former judge, land claims negotiator who used to say, you've got constitutionally protected land claims agreement, you've got statutory protection for self-government agreements, and both are absolutely dependent on 5-year funding agreements, which are contracts.
Well, there are more.
Yeah.
Well, we actually, TTC got involved and litigated that, as you, I think we were in front of that judge that you're referring to, and basically the 5-year funding agreements are not constitutionally protected. No. What is protected, though, is the obligation for them to negotiate in good faith to achieve these 5-year funding agreements. And it's bad faith to say we don't have a mandate and we don't have a budget. So we got that. That's the relationship we have with Canada. I'll give you one example of how it doesn't work. We were recently negotiating O&M costs for TTC capital assets and replacement reserves over time. Came to the biomass, we had $3 million. Yeah, currently on the books.
Well, we have $8 million worth of infrastructure, I think.
For biomass?
I don't know what it is. I think
it was, what number I had was around 4 for that purpose, but it's 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
Canada says, what? We have no mandate. We don't know about biomass. It's one of the first, we've never funded it before. So we have no mandate to consider these assets as part of our formulas and calculations. And we said, you do realize that that's bad faith. Well, do you want your money? Sign the deal or take it, or you know, that's totally bad faith. So the relationship with Canada has got all of those, that history and those dynamics involved, and and it really highlights the importance of the relationship with YG.
On whom they have now conferred some of their responsibilities, yeah.
But when you look at the devolution transfer agreement, it doesn't say, YG didn't say, we will fulfill the federal role in implementing the treaties and self-government agreements. It says, we will respect. It's a subtle difference, but so Canada said, well, you take on management, but they didn't transfer an active obligation to implement the treaties as if it was the federal government.
Yeah. So before we move on to this question of contracting and procurement generally into Chapter 22, let me ask all three of you, what's your view about how compliant or how honorably the commitment to First Nation employment has been as you see things in your community?
This is on the territorial?
Yeah, well, on the Chapter 22 talks about 25% employment as a goal. It talks about employment
within the bureaucracy of the provincial,
yes,
of the territorial
but
government.
also about employment in a variety of sectors, which are actually have passing mention in Chapter 22.
Well, you know, I think year after year we go in and we sit down and go through the numbers with YG, and they year after year, you know, fall considerably short. You know, and it's I think that we've recognized that the effort that they're putting into it is fairly minimal. You know, they put a budget to it, and you know, then in my opinion, that's where they feel their obligation ends. Once they have the budget. Once they have the budget and they have a few staff, they figure that that's where their obligation ends. So you know, that's always been an issue. However, you know, we've noticed that in Teslin, you know, we have a fair amount of capacity in the community, and you know, for instance, you know, highways has always been a fairly high percentage of First Nation hires, and in, you know, some of the other sectors as well, you know, we do fairly well, but you know, but that's also based, I think, a bit on our hiring strategy. We consider spouse of citizens to be the same. It feeds the same, you know, status children and whatnot. So you know, maybe our numbers are a bit skewed compared to what theirs would be. But you know, they don't make much of an effort. We've approached them about you know, apprenticeship, you know, opportunities and whatnot, and you know, the effort that they put into it is, you know, one of the answers that I've been given in the past is, well, you know, we don't have any money for it, right? And you know, and then they tell us, well, you know, we put it out there, but we don't have any buy-in from any of the departments, right? You know, they just put, I don't know, they put a inter-office memo out or what they do, but you know, it's the effort is not very impressive in my opinion.
Brad, you have?
I don't know if I have anything to add. I mean, right now in Teslin, anybody that, you know, with all the work that's there, just with this latest, I mean, if anybody's looking for employment, I mean, we were talking about it this morning, that we're looking for more people to help with the jobs that are there. You know, that's not necessarily YG jobs, that's just jobs in general from the projects, right?
But I mean, the people who are involved in different ways in government, if you're looking for a paralegal or a policy writer or things like that,
Right.
you can't pick them out of the air. You've got to find ways of getting those people trained and getting them ready
Yeah.
for the work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because in our, any of the projects from our 10-year community development plan, when we do the local managing of those projects, there's about a 15%, what do you call it, 15% void, I guess, in the community, but it's more so with the professional, like the engineers and the planners. We have to rely on outside expertise, right? So it's about 15% of the labor that we need to implement some of our jobs, and that we're lacking. So yeah, I hear you in that regard.
Just one comment I can make about, additional comment is, you know, where we see an opportunity is perhaps in secondments, you know, from them to the First Nation, and vice versa, where we can, you know, have them second some of our staff to build capacity. And, you know, in the past, you know, we have utilized it, but it's interesting. We have to, for us to put our staff, you know, within the YG bureaucracy, we have to, you know, cover their wages, of course, and you know, they're quite a bit higher than ours. So, you know, we have some gaps always there, you know, when we're trying to second back and forth, and then we have to pay, you know, room and board and all the rest of it. They make it, you know, pretty difficult for us to have any of our staff come in and build capacity. And then where we need capacity, you know, they say, well, you know, I guess, you know, they're looking for, they feel that they're short of capacity as well. So they don't make much of an effort to allow any of that capacity to come out to the communities. But the same thing, we have to supply room and board, and we have to top up their wages, because our you know, we can't afford to pay most often what their salary scales are at.
And yet one is fully aware that the federal government actually does quite substantial secondments and temporary assignments and so forth in a way that obviously benefits them by having someone go out and work in industry for a while, and have someone in industry work in government for a while, and improving understanding about the different systems and so forth. You know, perhaps you have to think of it as an investment rather than an expenditure if you're going to take advantage.
One of the, like the implementation manager that we were talking about here just now, I mean, that'd be a good opportunity for a secondment or for that type. I mean, there's embedded in the contractor's bid response, there's a TTC participation plan, or a First Nation participation plan, and it outlines their estimate, their willingness to provide education and training, or employment, or contracts, and that's, you know, that forms part of their bid response, right? So, but if we had the implementation manager, we need to track all that. We need to ensure that those benefits are coming to the community, and that would be a good position, just as an example. That would be a good position for secondment and for just learning on the job, right?
I mean, seconding a YG employee.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But we did put that out there. And,
Yeah,
you know,
but nothing.
They put very little effort into even finding us somebody.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question, perhaps I should have done it earlier. What's your sense, you've got tenders out, but what's your sense of how well the contracting community understands their treaty obligations? I mean, they may say it's not their job to, but once they sign on to do a bridge in Teslin, presumably somebody's going to understand that they have some legal obligations.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, these two bidders, Kiewit and Graham on the bridge, have had, you know, Aboriginal relations officers who turned up at the early meetings.
Right.
Who presumably have read the treaties.
Well, some of them had read some things, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think generally, you know, it's, the business community in the Yukon doesn't think that way yet, from what I can tell.
And when we talk to the contractors, if it's not in the RFP, they're not interested in anything else other than what's black and white.
So let me ask that question. Why isn't it in the RFP?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, so, that's the charter, in the bridge context, the experiment, the charter agreement, which flows under the government to government, and then the implementation plan, it got focused on, oh no, there were some things like artwork, and but it did not, and there was environmental and socioeconomic aspects, but the tools to make sure that the contractors had to explore, develop, and understand and cost out those things as part of their bid, I don't think we achieved enough detail.
But it's partly evolving culture, isn't it, question, Stephen? I mean, if you look at the United States, where minority hire provisions in public works contracts are so standard, nobody would even bid a contract without understanding their obligations.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the First Nation procurement policy, which came in, was, I mean, this contract got put together before that was implemented. That's another problem with the bridge thing. And so it appears as if there wasn't a good understanding of the policy or how it would fit in this particular circumstance.
Except for the BVR.
Except for the bid, one aspect of the policy. And so, again, hurry up, get it done, and 60 days didn't allow for that.
So let me change gears and switch from employment to contract. Procurement, Chapter 22 is full of language about procurement and contracts and
including breaking down, as I recall, you're supposed to break contracts apart, right?
Right.
That's the unbundling.
Unbundling.
And a general comment we've heard in these interviews, the process we've gone up to now, is that YG, I don't know about the federal government, YG has done a better job on capital projects than they have on service contracts. So we have heard some small First Nation small business people saying, I've never had a YG contract, or I wouldn't know how to get one to do copy editing or fixing office equipment, those kind of things. But at the level of capital projects, there is some sense that there are commitments there. Not everywhere is everybody happy with the extent to which YG or even the federal government is complying with those expectations. Can I just get you to talk about that generally? Not just about the bridge, but I mean, you've been involved with contracts with the federal government for a long time. I seem to recall you in a previous discussion talking about the early days. There was a federal official who was very good and very responsive, and actually, but that over time, that enthusiasm for doing this faded a bit.
Yeah, and so, I know that, early on, our fax machine would be inundated with procurement opportunities for First Nations and supply and, in supply contracts, specifically, but a broad range. And they had a full-time, worker within the federal government system in Whitehorse, that was very committed to doing that and following up. And it did create opportunities. But I noticed that over time that they're not coming in near as often, and if they do show up, on a fax machine, it's maybe one of 100 faxes you're going to receive that day, and but they'll put a procurement opportunity for a service in in Yellowknife. They'll send it to us, right? And which is not very useful. You kind of get overwhelmed with the volume of information or the paper. So, but I know at one time they had a staff person kind of designated, and it actually worked, you know, fairly well. But then they did away with the position, and I'm not sure why.
I think it was our Drapeau of the First Nation Chamber of Commerce who made the observation that there's a recent federal study that said that the First Nation entitlement to a fair share of contracts in Canada would be around 5%, but in fact the real number is closer to 1 or 2. But I suspect that's different in the Yukon. I mean, here we talk about 25% on some things, and but again, that's a question we talked about earlier, maybe lack of data.
But I mean, on one hand, they talk about procurement opportunities, and you know, they're taking away resources that helps identify the opportunities and match them to what's available, you know, in the territory, for instance. And then, you know, at the same time, they're reducing their sole sourcing limits, and really hiding behind them, right? Saying that, you know, we have to, this opportunity has to be open to every taxpayer in Canada, you know, and they've reduced them to the point where, you know, I'm not sure how they figure that procurement is even going to work, you know. However, you do see them sole sourcing $50 million road building jobs, you know, in the high north and stuff, right? So I don't know. I think it's I don't think that they put much focus and attention to it, and I don't think that they really care whether they succeed or not.
Stephen, would you want to add anything to that?
Well, the comment about sole sourcing, and Doug has made it a couple of times, and the change in the tightening of federal government funding terms and conditions around how you use it is seeming to be an increasing problem. I've noticed, like on the community services building, which TTC has got in the works, there's you know, there's a significant amount of money coming from YG and Canada, and that is one instance where Canada has provided capital funding, you know, and that particular program, as well as others like the gas tax. But buried in the detail and the legal document is you will follow the YG procurement rules. And when you get in there and you say, well, where is the latitude? Where's the thinking? It hasn't improved. You say it's tighter?
Yeah, in terms of the sole sourcing.
So what happens is that then the First Nations end up, you get a project where they may have 15-20% of the project. You get funding in response to treaty obligations, but the funding has got, basically you're so narrowly controlled and so tightly controlled that the First Nation itself can't even, on its own project, on its own land, doesn't have the ability to get the maximum value of it. And we've demonstrated, right, that it doesn't mean that the projects cost more just because you unbundle it. Sometimes you can even save money.
It is the opposite.
Yeah.
It's totally the opposite. The design fits better, the final product is better. I mean, with the lift stations, they were expecting, with the money that we tapped into, to build 2 of the 3 lift stations. Well, we ended up building all 3, and the issue with locally managing, if you have a surplus, you got to give it back, like to YG. But that's, in that instance, we did, because we had. I mean, it was just properly managed locally. Yeah.
So you gave money back. You know, but in terms of the overall study of Chapter 22, maybe that is something that needs some focus. Actually, as a constitutional implementation of the treaties, that government needs to change how other governments need to change how the rules around the funding will allow a certain type of procurement activity at the First Nation level, so you're maximizing the benefit rather than just imposing this YG system on it. That would be a big improvement.
Yeah.
And it's not just a YG system. the YG procurement rules, because all of the money is originating at the federal government level. We find that with our projects, we have to follow both of their sole sourcing
Whichever
guidelines.
is the strictest, whichever is the less.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah, forgot, yeah.
But-
It's interesting because in a different world, in the sort of allegedly free market system of the United States, minority communities don't have to use treaties or whatever to get participation. If you're in a community with a significant minority community, whatever it is, and the local bank has not got any employees from that community, but people are banking there, they pretty quickly put pressure on that institution to say, we're not represented in your institution, why don't you have any our people employed?
Yeah.
And they don't need treaties, they don't need laws, they just have public pressure. And we don't seem to use that very much here. Let me go back to this, the big question here, and a couple of you have heard on this question already, but I'm not in this discussion, so I'd like to do it, which is, you've talked about some really good things your community has done, community 10-year plan, the work you've done in terms of biomass or other projects. To what extent, if any, has Chapter 22 been a positive impact on these things or not?
Well, I think in terms of the bridge project, Chapter 22 laid a basis to oppose the original tendering, and it also laid a basis for a government-to-government evolution of that relationship. Other than, I mean, the business arm that's out there, TTC's business arm that's operating in the profit side and the business community, they don't use it at all. It's just simply not on their radar screen. It's just not available, or there's no advantage to it. Put it that way. I think that from my perspective, it's from TTC's economic development and business side, it has almost played no role that I can think of in their success, in their evolution.
Let me ask Brad the same question, and then I'll come to you, Doug.
Probably going to be the same answer. I mean, we do what we do for what's best for the community, and I don't believe that it's played too much of a role. We just do what we do in terms of local procurement, local contracting opportunities, local employment, local training and mentoring opportunities. We just do what we do, and it happens, right? So it's not because of Chapter 22.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartly with that it is, Chapter 22 has been, of no value to us to this point in time. I think where we can attribute our success, I guess, I believe is because of our ability and willingness to partner, and because of the planning that we do and whatnot. We can demonstrate, I think, that the logic and the rationale and the efficiencies, of working together. And I think, because of that, and because of the extensive planning that we do and consultation with the community and that, that we've been successful, which has nothing to do with Chapter 22. Often the last person to the party is, the Yukon government or the federal government. And, we often have to kind of drag them in and by demonstrating kind of the success that we've been able to achieve because of the partnerships. But it has been successful for us, but not because of Chapter 22.
So now I'm going to ask all three of you the same question, but not on that subject. But Doug, you, at the beginning of this interview, talked about the impact of the land claim settlement in terms of capital formation and transformation of the economy. Would you want to add to what you said there at the beginning?
You know, I'm not sure what you're looking for.
Well,
me to
you
add.
talked about suddenly funds were available to become economic actors and economic players as a result of the land claim settlement. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was true. I noticed that, you know, when the land claims were settled, I went to work for the government and the First Nation government, and I was helping them kind of set up their self-government, you know, structure and staffing it up primarily. But you know, I sat on the Economic Development Board at the time, and you know, we were quickly overwhelmed. We were getting 1 or 2 business opportunities a week for a while there. You know, the Yukon was so cash starved. So you know, there was significant opportunity because of that. You know, and TTC, through kind of its learnings that it went through, painful that they were at times, you know, started investing in, you know, this, you know, as a for-profit only mandate, or a profit-driven mandate, and really had nothing to do with investing, you know, in the Yukon. We had a strategy that we were designing to be, you know, so that we weren't dependent upon the resource sector, and so, you know, we had a strategy that we invested outside the Yukon so that we weren't affected so much by the downturns in the Yukon economy, and it's, you know, so we're in 5 or 6 different sectors. You know, we're in a number of different geographical locations all across Western Canada, and it's proven to be very successful for us, especially through the pandemic. And you know, so that wasn't, you know, that was by design. And one of the things I've noticed is that, you know, over the years, you know, with a number of the premiers, we received a lot of criticism because we weren't, you know, following kind of the path that a lot of the other First Nations were of investing in the Yukon. And we heard that comment quite a few times over the years, you know, you guys don't invest in the Yukon. And it wasn't, you know, it was actually a conscious decision we made. And, you know, it turned out, you know, to be very advantageous to us through the pandemic in particular.
Stephen, 50 years ago, I would say as a general observation on the streets of Whitehorse, but probably in many of the Yukon smaller communities, what seemed obvious to me as a young person was that most of the poor people in the Yukon Territory were Indigenous. Most of the Indigenous people were poor. That's less so now. I'm not sure how well we can quantify it, but would you say the change that has happened on that score has been very much because of the land claim settlement, slightly because of the land claim settlement, or not much?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm fully qualified to give that answer, but my sense is that that in Tesla, and my experience has been mainly just with Tesla and Tlingit Council, was that the combination of recognition of rights, availability of a pool of money in the millions of dollars, and a formal recognition of self-government rights as a nation, that when you put those 3 things together, that you enabled the Tesla and Tlingits to do their own thing, self-empowerment. And I got recruited by them and left the non-Aboriginal solicitor world of protecting people's money, which is really what solicitors do, to helping Tesla enable this journey of self-recognition and self-realization and empowerment. And I did it, you know, as giving legal advice, but it was part of that picture. And so I've watched, been 23 years, so I've watched some of the children grow up, and they're now giving me instructions from finance department. So to me, yes, I think it's had a huge impact in that sense.
Okay. Right.
I don't have the history. Yeah, I mean, I'm newer to the territory. Not brand new, but newer.
You know, I think one of the things that you know has added to that success was that early on, even with all of our business interests, you know, the First Nation, you know, passed policy that we had to support those businesses regardless.
And no interference.
And yeah, and no political interference or anything of that sort. So you know, it was interesting because some of the other First Nation investors that we were partnered with in some of these businesses refused to go there. But you know, in our thinking, well, why wouldn't we support that business? Because we're either the owner or part owners. And so you know, we did that, and we enforced it pretty religiously early on, to the point where if we hired you know, a consultant or a contractor or whoever to you know, do work for us, if they were going to submit you know, expenses for hotels or rooms or whatever, if we had a business that we were invested in, or a citizen was invested in, they had to use that business or we wouldn't pay the invoice, right? For that portion of the invoice. And so, you know, I think we kind of mirrored that policy with our own citizens that got into business as well, and provided them, you know, kind of that mandatory support. And it gave them enough of a base, I think, that they were able to build on it. And so I think we have quite a few contractors now, and in the community. We do have the major, you know, the major business owners, but we also have a lot of contractors in you know, construction, carpentry, building construction, and you know, gravel work. We have you know, dozens and dozens, where not too many years ago we would struggle to find 2 or 3 so that we could invitationally tender projects that were our own projects. We know we couldn't find enough competition to get a competitive price. But where now, you know, we have dozens of contractors, right? So there has been success, but I think it was partially due to that policy where we've really, you know, made it mandatory to support.
Brad and Stephen, any last words?
One area that I was thinking, we haven't mentioned housing, and housing in the context of an economic development driver, and not to be overlooked, I think, and back to the relationship with Canada recently, you know, in the last 3 or 4 budgets, 3 budgets anyway, 2019, Canada has started to focus on making money available for housing, and not just affordable housing, and they've recognized that the housing in the Yukon that they transferred to TTC in particular in 1995 was very deficient, and they have not made available any funds since then for new builds, you know, or even basic renovations. So we know that, and we've had, so as a result of that, the last 3 or 4 fiscal years, TTC's had somewhere between $1 million, $1.5 million to do renovations and new builds of houses that are derelict houses. And I think that's promoting some kind of a local contracting business in Teslin, because it's consistent. So that's a question for Doug and Brad, I think.
Well, I think that's part of it, Stephen, but also TTC's own housing program. You know, we initiated our own housing program where, you know, we partnered with the First Nation Housing Market Fund.
Yeah, the First Nation Market Housing Fund.
Yeah, and you know, we've got you know, where we've entered into guaranteeing mortgages, but we also provide land to our citizens, and we've went and developed a grant program so that we actually, you know, we will give our citizens, if they you know, go through and fill out the application and meet the criteria, but you know, one of them being they have to have a piece of land, but you know, we'll give them a $54,000 grant, And we've got a package in place where we do 10 of those a year. And so we've done 4 years now, or this is the 5th year? Can't recall. But
Yeah.
I think this is maybe the 5th year that we've done that. So on top of all of the, the housing construction that we do, with the additional funding that Stephen was just referred to, we do have kind of our ongoing core funding, that creates work. And now we have these 10 citizens that are potentially building or renovating their homes in the community. So it's created a lot of that type of work. And so we have a lot of contractors that have evolved because of it as well.
And that's the story of the 10-year community development plan in general. Right. Is exactly that. It's creating industry. It's creating the contracting opportunities.
And that initiative that I just talked about is in the 10-year community development plan.
Yeah, they all are. Yeah.
Every one of them's in that plan.
Yeah, and you see, those monies come from Canada as FTA transfers, which are on, these are the gap-filling housing dollars they have some, but it's just reporting. How you contract, how you spend, where, how, is all up to TTC. And so what I've seen is that now we have policies, we have policies and procedures to manage those monies, et cetera. So to me, it's a very good example of taking monies, coming into the territory, recycling them into an industry, and then people are also, though, building equity in homes. They own those homes, and they're able to transfer them.
Another opportunity is in TTC's traditional territory. There's 44 potential environmental sites that are of concern, and as a result, proposals are submitted to CERNAC for funding. And through that funding, there's education and training and contracting opportunities to learn about environmental monitoring and remediation and cleanup. And at the end of the day, we've been doing that since 2012 now, but it provides those opportunities and employment, and again, that's all in the plan. So it's those type of opportunity identification and with an implementation manager, that's what they would be doing, is identifying those opportunities, accessing the funds to create those opportunities in the community.
And that's a treaty-based relationship with Canada, because they're Canada retained on settlement land, I think, environmental liabilities, VYG. So
got to carry
so it's a treaty-based another relationship with Canada. Maybe we have more connection to Canada than we thought.
Gentlemen, I'm going to say Konishtis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I finish up with one story
Okay.
in regards to this environmental remediation? Over time, we worked on building the relationship and delivering on projects and managing them as well, and working with them. And it was a struggle, of course, because they have competing interests all across Canada. But it was not too many years ago. We had a really wet season, and we had been approved for funding to do some environmental remediation. And based on the work we had done and the experience we had, the water table was quite a bit too high, and so we refused to do the work because it wasn't good use of taxpayer dollars. Yeah. And we went to them, and of course they had flowed the funding at the beginning of the fiscal year, so we had the money in our bank account, and we said, we're not prepared to do that project because one, we're not going to get the best results because it was a bunch of testing and that, which it's in our best interest to get the best quality results, but two, it's not good use of taxpayer dollars. And they're kind of shocked and said, well, we've already given you the money, right? And we said, well, it's $400,000, $400 and some thousand. So, well, we'll bring you a check. And so we walked into their office, 4 or 5 days later with a check, and give them the money back and said, we're going to apply next year, but they took the money and said, well, we have another project in Quebec or someplace that was over budget and they needed more money for. And they said, you know, this is perfect, you know, because we have a project, right? And so, you know, the next year and the years following, when we go and meet with them, you know, they try to work with us, right?
Right.
It's not us. They're trying to beat them up and get some money, because you know we want to clean this up, but we want to do it in a very responsible fashion, right? So that was interesting that we did that, and they were quite shocked when we walked in there with a check and.
And you were contributing to good inter-nation relationships.
Yeah, right. It's two-way coin, it's a double-sided coin. Yeah. And that probably characterizes, you know, that's TTC's thinking, actually. Richard always quotes, he said, we went to Ottawa, and we didn't ask for a handout, we went with a plan. Yeah.
Well,
And
thank you again.
And he recites
Yeah.
that often.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we've been promised a donut or something.